Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and after the Gettysburg Campaign, Hill and the Army of Northern Virginia retreated back into Virginia and prepared for what George Meade and the Army of the Potomac planned for the fall of 1863. Once across the river, Hill encamped near Bunker Hill. As he rode around the perimeter of his lines, two cavalry officers Once across the river, Hill encamped near Bunker Hill. As he rode around the perimeter of his lines, two cavalrymen from Jeb Stuart's cavalry attempted to pass through Hill's picket line in search of food with no passes, so the infantrymen would not let them pass. They took their case to the newly arrived Hill. He told them that he could not help them since they did not belong to his corps, that they needed to get passes from Stuart. Then Hill smiled and said, "I'll tell you what you ought to do. Flank 'em." The horsemen took advantage of the fact that the infantrymen watched as they talked with Hill but could not hear the conversation, and walked up to the picket line and passed right through. Hill's pickets thought that meant that Hill gave them permission to pass through their lines. Hill said, "Well, that is the coolest and boldest flank movement I've ever saw." Two deaths hit Hill's corps in rapid succession. Pettigrew, the 35-year-old North Carolinian, passed away. The next day, Pender succumbed to his wounds in Staunton, Virginia. The corps moved out, and by the 26th, they arrived at Culpeper, Hill's hometown. The return to his birthplace gave him great joy because he got to visit with his wife Dolly and daughter Russie. He stayed at the home of his brother Baptist and spent a week meeting with family and friends still in the area. The war took a terrible toll on the town. Confederate surgeons frequently used its buildings as hospitals, and now they appeared run down and dilapidated. Still, Hill relished his stay in Culpeper. After that brief visit, Hill shifted his course south to Orange Courthouse and took stock of the 3rd Corps. It was a shell of its former self, with only 11,207 men present for duty, the smallest corps in the Army. 2/3 of its animals became lost to the Gettysburg Campaign, and the horses present were unserviceable. The Light Division needed to be refitted with rank-and-file soldiers as well as officers. Of the original brigadiers, Branch was dead, Gregg was dead, Pender was dead, Archer was a prisoner of war, and Field was incapacitated in just over a year of service. Only Thomas remained at the head of his brigade. To lead the Light Division, Hill appointed Cadmus Wilcox. One of Hill's biographers described him as such. Wilcox was a 40-year-old bachelor, a professional soldier who had been at West Point with Hill, McClellan, and Pickett. He was 6 feet tall, customarily wore a short round jacket and battered straw hat. Wilcox was not a deep thinker, but he was a tough fighter who, once a military objective had been fixed, drove toward that point unswervingly. Although Hill liked Wilcox personally, he maintained the same distance from him as from other officers. While camped around Orange Courthouse, a religious revival swept through the Army. Many regiments saw multiple converts during the revival, but Hill, an undemonstrative Episcopalian, would not become swept up in the religious fervor. He attended church on Sundays, but only attended other religious meetings if his wife wanted to attend. The Corps slowly began to grow as men came back from furlough, and those able to return after receiving wounds found their way back to camp. However, some men did not come back. They deserted, and Hill presided over the executions of many of his own beloved Light Division. By that point, the Army of the Potomac sat just across the Rapidan River from the Army of Northern Virginia, and in September, Lee dispatched Longstreet to the Army of Tennessee in the Western Theater. Likewise, Meade's army lost 2 corps to the Western armies for the Union. By mid-September, the two armies stood nearly evenly matched. Hill's corps grew to 16,300 men in the 3-month lull, and Hill began to chomp at the bit, ready for a fight. Lee, with the Union Army nearly equal in number to his, decided on a bold plan to turn Meade's flank and give chase when the Union Army retreated toward Washington. Hill's troops began their move to Culpeper, but found the town deserted. Meade had gotten word of at least Hill's corps moving in his direction and began pulling his forces back. The chase was on. When the 2 Confederate corps reached Warrenton, the infantry waited for the wagon trains to reach them, since the infantry outpaced the movement of the trains. Jeb Stuart reported to Lee that the Union corps were burning what they couldn't carry with them, and Lee saw this as the perfect opportunity to continue the pursuit and possibly destroy the Union Army in detail. Hill veered eastward for Bristoe Station, and the young corps commander sensed a quick kill if he acted promptly. He rode at the head of his columns, hoping to spy the Federals in their retreat. On a plateau overlooking Bristoe Station, he spied William H. French's 3rd Corps clustered together in mass as they awaited their turn to ford across Broad Run on their way to Manassas Junction. No time must be lost, Hill said. He ordered Heath's division to press down the road in battle line, destroying whatever came into their sight. His artillery opened up from a rise and caught the Federals completely off guard. At this point, Hill reverted back to his division commander days and placed Heath's troops and ignored the other 2 divisions coming up. As Heath's men pushed toward the Federals, Hill went to a rise to observe the battle, but something caught his eye over to his right. He had not reconnoitered the ground completely and did not see that not all of the Federals were retreating. Behind an embankment on the Orange and Alexandria Railroad stood what Hill conceived of as a detachment of Union soldiers poised to sweep the flank of Heath's men. In fact, the detachment was 3,000 Union soldiers of Warren's 2nd Corps. Hill was fallen into a trap laid by the Union forces. Hill quickly stopped Heath's men and told the brigadier general on the right, John R. Cook, the brother-in-law of Jeb Stuart, that his flank would be in danger. Hill then went to the divisions he had ignored previously and ordered Anderson's men forward, but before they went into battle line, Hill ordered Heath's division forward again. As the division moved toward the ford, just as expected, the Federal musketry hit them in the flank. The division turned and was faced with either retreat or attack. They attacked, with one brigade breaking through the Federal fortifications. However, the 2nd Union line drove them back. Cook went down with a shattered shin bone. The Confederate line shattered, and since they possessed no support, the Federal troops hurriedly advanced, capturing prisoners and 5 pieces of artillery placed unsupported by Hill close to Heath's division. Nightfall brought the 40-minute Battle of Bristoe Station to a close. It was a horrible engagement for Hill, who lost significant manpower. His total losses were 1,378, or roughly 1 man lost for every 2 seconds of the engagement. The 27th North Carolina lost 290 men out of its 416, and 33 of its 36 officers were killed, wounded, or captured. In his report, Hill admitted his faults. "I'm convinced that I made the attack too hastily, and at the same time that a delay of half an hour, and there would have been no enemy to attack. In that event, I believe I should equally have blamed myself for not attacking at once." Lee and Hill rode over the battlefield as rain fell on the 2 generals. Hill explained the battle and repeatedly apologized throughout. When he finished, Lee said, "Well, well, General, bury these poor men and let us say no more about it." Although the Battle of Bristoe Station ended in disaster for the Confederacy, the campaign remained successful. Lee effectively drove the Army of the Potomac away from their encampments at the Rapidan in full retreat toward Washington, D.C., inflicted 2,292 casualties on the Union, and destroyed tons of Union material, including the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, which the Union used to supply their troops in Northern Virginia. The Battle of Bristoe Station was one setback in a successful campaign, but one that many people in the South would not forgive Hill for, and one Hill would never forget. One of Hill's biographers put it perfectly when he said, "What changed Hill was a combination of things. The larger responsibility of Corps command was not appealing to him. Staying clear of combat, as he was forced by rank to do, was counter to his nature and talents. The attacks of prostatitis were becoming more frequent and more crippling. Most damaging of all, perhaps, Hill lacked the breadth of vision and wisdom to be superb at the head of a corps. Too often narrow and impetuous in his thinking, he did not have Jackson's deep confidence or Longstreet's unshakable calm. Unrivaled as a division commander, Hill simply did not or could not adjust as well to the next step up the military ladder."